Oh, Marty. So, if you don't know by now, mosasaurs, well, big lizards, lived in the Cretaceous period, very teethy. And with those teeth, they occasionally actually combat each other. And we actually have a lot of fossil evidence for that. So I thought today's video, I'd go through a couple of examples. I say a few examples of mosasaurs nomming on each other. Yeah. So first of all, let's go with the most famous example, and that is this specimen of Tylosaurus napoleoncus. Now, this specimen used to actually be the holotype specimen of the now defunct, maybe, species of Tylosaurus kansanensis. Now, this specimen was recovered from the Upper Canisian, so around about 87-86 million years ago, and this particular animal was about 5 meters in length when it died. And yes, this one died from mosasaur combat, so let's take a look at that. So, as you can see from this figure, the specimen was bitten across and underneath the skull, and basically, unfortunately, this animal was bitten with so much force, it crushed its skull essentially, and also there seems to be a twist in the bite, and that's because the cervical vertebrae immediately connecting to the skull were twisted at a 45-degree angle. This animal was basically had its neck broken and its skull crushed. That's a really unfortunate death. So, based on the angle and the size of the bite, we can estimate that the animal that bit this other Tylosaurus napoleoncus was probably about 7 meters in length, which would suggest that this was intraspecific combat, so this was combat between two members of the same species. And like with a lot of these instances, we actually don't know what caused this, but it could be anything from food, territory, or maybe even mating rights. Now, another interesting example is Plioplatycarpines, and in fact, this Platycarpus specimen that comes from around about the same time as that previous Tylosaurus specimen, this animal seems to have fractured the end of its jaw. The jaw actually healed. This animal actually survived. But unfortunately, it looks like the first tooth was sort of displaced a bit, so this animal had probably a hard time feeding, but it survived. It survived a horrible injury that we don't really know the cause of, but it could be like with the previous specimen, it could be intraspecific combat. Another example is this large specimen of Plioplatycarpus that was discovered from the Campanian age bear paw formation. This animal has 2 bite marks, one on the dentary and one on the eye, and in fact, we think that the animal that attacked it was of a similar size, around about 4.5 to 6 meters, and this animal attacked this other one in parallel, so they were parallel to each other, and the bite on the jugal bone, which is the under the eye, that could have potentially blinded this animal, maybe, we're not entirely sure with that. Now, Haliosaurians are not an exception to this rule as well. In fact, Pleurodens serpentis, which has been discovered in the last few years, a lot of the specimens that described in the initial paper describing that species actually showed a lot of pathologies, particularly on the dentary. As you can see with this one, which has sort of a rugose texture to it. And even with this individual, the syntype, which has a big bulbous mass of bone on the dentary. And again, it seems that these animals were fighting amongst each other, and it seems particularly with the adults that as they got larger and more robust, Pleurodens serpentis encountered more combative aggression from other Pleurodens serpentis. Now, you have to remember, this comes from the Mosasaurus Moroccan phosphates during the Maastrichtian, and that means that possibly a lot of these species of mosasaur were undergoing a lot of ecological pressures, so combat between individuals of the same species and other mosasaurs was probably a lot more common, especially with the mosasaur diversity in the Moroccan phosphates. Now we come to the big boy himself, Mosasaurus halfmani, and particularly the holotype, which I actually didn't know about this until I was researching this. The holotype actually has, it looks like 2 tooth marks underneath part of the dentary, and this is probably from a larger Mosasaurus halfmani, and the holotype is already a big specimen. And that isn't even the only specimen. There's other specimens of Mosasaurus halfmani that have sustained massive damage to their jaws. In particular, this specimen seems to have been bitten and had a massive bone infection in its jaw, which would have been extremely painful for this animal, this poor animal. And it seems like that this individual, who's from the same area, in fact had, just as bad. I mean, look at that. That's awful. That's like eating a jawbreaker. That literally is a jawbreaker. It's a broken jaw. And again, it seems like that these animals had some kind of intraspecific or interspecific, so combat with another species, and this caused massive damage to the jaws of Mosasaurus. But these animals were able to live with these injuries for a time after they occurred and actually seemed to look after themselves quite well with it. Now, yes, I know, I've done this one to death, but this is another example of a Mosasaurus halfmani that sustained a massive injury. And in fact, this injury killed it, and we all know what this is. This is the endocast of a subadult Mosasaurus halfmani from the same area as those other injured Mosasauruses. This one, however, seems to have been rammed. There's actually a bone fragment inside the brain. The brainstem was severed by that bone fragment. And the only creature in the area that seems to have ramming capabilities is another mosasaur called Hanosaurus bernardi. And this animal seems to have either been in the territory or been close to or even near food sources of a Hanosaurus, and the Hanosaurus wasn't very happy, so just booped it, but booped it right hard. Now, with our Haliosaurus flipping friend Thalassatitan over in the phosphates of Morocco in the same area as Pleurodon serpentis, yeah, they were in the same situation. There's a lot of Thalassatitan specimens that seem to have a lot of dentary or face injuries, and these are consistent with face biting, so Thalassatitan was really a terror, not just to other mosasaurs like that poor Haliosaurus, but to itself. And it does seem that all ontogenetic stages of this 10-metre long mosasaur seem to have engaged in, well, fighting each other, absolutely destroying each other. And again, this could be due to ecological pressures from having an area with so many mosasaur species in it, and therefore a lot of competition, not just amongst different species, but with individuals of the same species. Now, over in Israel, with Thalassatitan atrox's potential brother, Thalassatitan prognathodon curiae, however you want to say it, the holotype specimen actually has a dint, basically, in the frontal bone, and this seems to be a tooth from another prognathodon curiae, but why the singular tooth? No idea, but I'm not going to question it, it's dead. And just to clarify, we don't actually know if the tooth actually killed this one, but highly doubt it. I mean, look at the size of it. It's a big skull. And look at the size of the tooth mark. Unless it's a bullet hole. Could be that. I don't know. Can mosasaurs actually shoot with guns? I don't know. How about another prognathodon, maybe Thalassatitan, in Prognathodon saturata, which is from the Netherlands? Now, this animal lived around the same time, the same place as Mosasaurus half-marni and another prognathodon we're actually going to get to in a bit. But this particular individual seems to have actually had its rib broken. And from the look of the fossil, this is a pretty clean snap, so whatever happened here, it must have been brutal on the animal's breathing. Now, based on speculation and interpretation, it seems like this animal was rammed by another mosasaur. Now, it could be Hanosaurus, or it actually could be another specimen of Prognathodon saturata, but we're not entirely sure because all we have is a broken rib. Rib. I could go for some barbecue ribs right now. Ooh, I could go for some ribs. Oh, not this fella's ribs, no. They wouldn't have any meat on them, would they? No. Now, the final individual I'm going to talk about is this specimen of Prognathodon sectoricus. So this individual actually comes from the same place and time as the Prognathodon saturata specimen that I just mentioned. Except this fella got nipped right in the nose. Oh, it must have hurt. So it seems like this particular individual was actually bitten on the snout, so the premaxilla, part of the maxilla, and a bit of the dentary. And whilst the initial injuries weren't too bad, just some tooth gouges on the face, the resulting infection actually ate away at part of the bone in the maxilla, part of the premaxilla, and even the dentary, and affected the neurovascular complexes, the sort of, little tubes inside the bone that have blood vessels and nerves in them. It affected those, and may have affected the feeding of this poor. Now, again, we actually don't know if this actually killed the animal, but I mean, ow. Sensitive. Ow. Poor fella. So, mosasaurs, yeah, they really didn't like each other, apparently. They really wanted to combat each other. It's like me when I go out on Friday night, Sometimes I get a bit leery and I get flattened on my face. A lot. I've stopped going out. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, subscribe, follow, do all those nice things. And I'll see you in the next one. Ta-da. Bye.